Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Season 8 in Diablo 4. Today marks the first look at the state of the classes. We're going to take a look at the current best pit clears available. With the way Blizzard increased the difficulty of them, we're definitely not looking at pit 150 clears anymore, but around the 100 level at the moment, which is pretty cool. In fact, the highest pit clear right now is 111, just to give you that perspective. Now, pit clears certainly don't represent the average power of a class, but it does tell an interesting story in a way for us to gauge things, especially with the very interesting builds that are actually in use today. So we'll start from the lowest clear and work our way up through each class. Let's get into it. We begin with Spiritborn, whose highest clear right now is a 93. They are noticeably behind every other class, and we're seeing a kind of mass exodus of Spiritborn because of it. It's a shame because, I mean, technically they're not like ultra behind in terms of the pit clears we're going to look at today, but they are obviously weaker than every other class. That's a surprise going into the season because of what we're expecting from the PTR into season launch, and one of the few buff powers being linked to poison, and Spiritborn being able to engage and lean into that super well. So what's happened here? Well, the top clear is using the Quill Volley build, but it's important for me to state that it's actually not that build that's the top build. Sure, it's the current highest clear, but the one behind that was a 90 pit, with a completely different build leaning into Toxic Skin. Not far behind that, you have an 81 clear where they're using Touch of Death. In fact, the next Quill Volley build isn't even the second place, third place, fourth place. It's not until fifth place that you see another Quill Volley build. So this tells us that things are a little bit varied right now for Spiritborn in what the best option is, which is nice because it shows that a couple different options are actually performing really well for them to give you some variety. What's not nice is that they're all significantly behind the rest of the classes in terms of output. And even then, the top clears that are good 20 behind or whatever, the average pit clear falls off a cliff very quickly compared to other classes. So while there is some positives here, it's pretty negative overall. Anyway, it's a familiar concept from the original Season 6 high period of Spiritborn with Quill Volley, basically generating enough resources to endlessly spam out these volleys. And it's a great build because it's able to deal with all kinds of content very well. Obviously with pushing pits, it's very strong, but you know, it'll serve you for boss killing and open world content too, which is nice for an all-rounder build that you can't always say for the top builds for pit pushing. But if we're going to get a patch that changes things in a noticeable way, I do think Spiritborn's the prime target for a relevant buff. How will they do it though, and how far will it go? But next we got to talk about Barbarian, and a very surprising but very cool build, something actually fresh for Barbarian, unheard of. It's Minion Barbarian that currently holds the highest clear as I make this video, a pit 105 in 13 minutes and 5 seconds. Apparently this all comes about because of the ultimate skill, Call of the Ancients, the one that summons the kind of ancient helpers, now finally having a summon tag, which allows it to generate new scaling opportunities. This then links up to the unique pants Ariet's bearing, empowering your ancients, creating earthquakes and dust devils, as well as burning effects, which gives them quite a few ways to scale that damage. Now, what's very comical to me is the fact that seemingly the best option to go for here is the one that's generating earthquakes. This comes after they were very clear about Earthquake being an awesome build in Season 7, but they don't want Earthquake to be the focus of Season 8 again. They want to greatly change things, and very importantly, the devs said that they want Barbarian to feel like a physical fighter again, not one that's generating other effects like, say, the Dust Devils of the past or the earthquakes on the ground in Season 7. They want you to be smacking foes with your weapon. And so what we're seeing for the top build right now is a build around summoning minions that are generating earthquakes, certainly not yourself directly. Now, as silly as that is, this is definitely different and quite refreshing for the class. So I don't think it's a bad thing at all. It also engages with the newly buffed Whirlwind, which I wasn't exactly expecting to see in the highest forms of content right now. I figured it'd turn out to be, you know, a really good tool for leveling, but not be able to result in, say, the single target you need for the kind of pit pushing that's happening here. But really, it's just a modifier, a thing to use while you play around your summons, which is really nice. There was also a kind of insane bug to do with infinite scaling damage for Whirlwind in particular, but that's actually been hotfixed in the manner of just straight up disabling the unique tie to it, Crown of Lucian. So it was certainly stronger in potential briefly, but they are reacting pretty quick to these bugs. But the way that this player is trying to maximize the summon damage is interesting, like say using the unique helm, the Bastard Helm, increasing your fire damage, thereby increasing the output of the summons. Engaging in CDR to maximize that. Still using, say, the earthquakes aspect, where if you're standing in an earthquake, you get this big damage bonus, and with the way that summons changed in a recent season, your damage goes to your minions, so as you enhance your own damage, you enhance them. So the player wants to be spinning in earthquakes. So yeah, very surprised by this and very impressed. Season 8 for Barbarian, minions. Next up then, we also have a Pit 105 clear, but this one done a little bit quicker than the last one, so they're obviously very close, and it's Cataclysm Druid, with a familiar name that's usually pushing these pit tiers, that is Boiler Up for the Druid class. Now going into the season, we kind of expected Cataclysm to do very well and potentially be their top build. This is quite funny because just like we said with Barbarian, the devs made it very clear that they don't want builds that have been a top build before to go into the next season and be the top build. Well, that's obviously not changed for Bloodwave, and then you've got Lightning Spear right there with Sorcerer, and so of course we also have Cataclysm with Druid, so I guess that's just a process. Having said that, there are some key changes and interesting differences with this build compared to previous seasons, like the whole snapshotting thing. Now it's a lot harder to actually snapshot power into each of your Cataclysms, but it's still possible to get your guaranteed overpowers. You just need a full stack provocation, and interestingly this encourages seemingly more of a start-stop nature of this build. And with that new boss power, Belial's I-Beam, this actually gives you this stealth effect, which makes your overpowered damage a massive multiplier. You combine that with a mythic unique, Shroud of False Death, and suddenly its effect is actually relevant. Damage on next attack after stealth being increased, and obviously if you haven't dealt damage in the last 2 seconds, you gain stealth. This seems to work in combination with Belial's I-Beam power in a pretty unexpected and effective way, giving you 2 sources of stealth, and stealth just basically meaning your next overpowered cast is going to hit really hard. If you intentionally pause between casts then and set up with the stacks of provocation, you can guarantee that overpower and then give it massive multipliers through the stealth gameplay. So at least it's a little bit different and interesting in that way, but it is still very much a Cataclysm build. And it would seem like it's a top choice for pit pushing. In fact, multiple of the top clears for Druids right now, they're all using this very same concept. And that is to essentially juice up your Cataclysms as much as possible, extend the duration as long as possible, and make the most out of each cast. We're seeing a lot of bear form around that, of course for survivability purposes, which lends itself really well into this whole pit pushing concept. Familiar uniques come back then with Tempest Roar and the Majolnik Ring to make this work, but in this case we're also seeing the classic Inexorable Will for the pull-in, the AoE nature of that. But yeah, as it stands, it just seems to be working how it's meant to, doing very well. This seems relatively well balanced. I guess the only thing you could really call for Druid is just a bigger variety of builds that are competitive with this. Obviously the biggest downside here is that it's essentially Cataclysm again, even if it has some interesting changes to it. I did wonder whether Druid would end up engaging with the whole poison concept with the Ashava power and leaning into the massive multiplier potential of damage over time and poisons in general, but I guess that hasn't panned out. Next up then we have Necromancer, and it's a pit 108, so 3 above the Druid. Still very impressive, but it was done by a player in the East, so they posted their run on Bilibili, so it's in quality we can't quite look at. So instead we got this run from AK, which is a 107, so literally one before that, still showing the insane power of Bloodwave. And this is the main class I'm playing this season and working on this build too. We're seeing unbelievable numbers where you're towards 1,000 billion in the hits during pack clears. The whole point of the build then is to power up your blood waves as much as possible, causing them to proc and send out 3 times, combined with the old Kesami's unique to have the waves slam into each other. So overall, you're getting 6 waves slamming into each other, pulling the mobs into one location. Corpse Tendrils doesn't need to pull anything in because the blood wave's already doing it anyway. As you cast these blood waves, you're getting massive damage reduction. Through the build, you're generating a ton of fortification to protect your health. You want to stack max life anyway to increase the potential of overpower, so you get a load of survivability just built in, kind of like the Bear Druid thing. And for single target, this is absolutely insane. As you cast Blood Wave, the next wave that hits gets stronger and the next wave that hits gets stronger. And then within the next 8 seconds, you have all of these damage modifiers from lots of different effects to make the next wave even stronger, and so on. So when you get to pits and, packs of enemies that are surviving a bit longer, that's where the numbers get a bit silly and really scale beyond reason. And this is even in the scenario where, they really did nerf this build compared to Season 7. Like, all Ultimates got that 200% multiplier cap on it, and they took away the multiplier that was found on the Kesame unique pants, which is required for this build. To be fair, they did walk back a bit of the nerfs from PTR to launch. They did buff up the base power of Bloodwave itself, and the only real contending build was the Blood Spear, which, to be fair, is cool and pretty effective, but if you wanted to get as high as possible, it's obvious that Bloodwave is still the current king. There's also a big change this season with, say, the Flesh Eater legendary node that gives you this damage multiplier after consuming 5 corpses. Well, thankfully in Season 8, we're able to build that up and then start building up the next stack of it while the current one's going, allowing you to maintain that multiplier actually with some intention. So yeah, maybe we're spamming a lot of Bloodwave, but at least we're managing those stacks with the corpse explosions, right? And once everything's grouped up, you drop a Blight Pull for another damage multiplier there. But to be honest with you, having played this build for the season compared to Season 7, there isn't a great amount of change in the way that we're playing this. So I am interested to see if this build will take a hit or just be left alone, and how it will do in relation to Blood Spear, which to my understanding is having some funkiness with the echoing Blood Spears that are occurring, not getting the damage multiplier or bonuses that they should. So it feels like a bit of a bug build in that negative way that could be resolved in their first balance patch and push it to compete with Bloodwave, which I'd really like to see. But we'll have to wait and see. Next up then, we have Rogue, second place at this very moment, with an impressive 109 clear by Matthias the Gamer, who's gone against the kind of no meta of Death Trap to make some pretty clearly impactful changes we're going to mention. But Death Trap itself, this was busted beyond belief in the PTR. The devs were keenly aware of that and made it a big topic in the livestream before the season launch for Rogue. And despite the fact that they definitely addressed it, it's still the top option for Rogue. So actually, this kind of means their changes were reasonable. The big issue at the time was how it trivialized the content by basically giving you everything at once. So you had insane damage output, high mobility, AoE, control of the enemies with the easy grouping of them, unbelievable CDR, so you just got no cooldowns on anything. And at launch, it's clearly still very good, but maybe not as busted as it was in the PTR. Anyway, the point of Death Trap is to spam this ultimate skill as your main source of output. It's still very possible to reduce the cooldowns of the trap, so much so that you are able to press it constantly by aggressively hunting CDR in all forms. This trap, it has multiple tags you can work CDR into, the trap tag, ultimate tag, and general CDR too. But with the maximized setups, you certainly are more squishy than what we saw of it in the PTR. Still, with the gameplay, you've got lots of control because Death Trap pulls enemies in. And similar to what we said with the Necromancer, you're going to need some specific uniques to make it work in the first place that enable the build. Rogue has Eyes in the Dark, the unique pants that are going to do exactly that, by massively increasing the Death Trap's damage and arming. That combined with the Beastfall Boots unique can scale the damage of the ultimate based on the energy consumed when using it. But that's Death Trap in general. It's been the Matthias version that's changed the game a little bit by worrying less about increasing the damage through Overpower and Banished Lord's Talisman, meaning you don't need to stack as much energy for that purpose. Still, with enough commitment to CDR, the trap becomes roughly a 10-second cooldown, and then that gets cut into by Preparation, the specialization passive that's going to cut off 5 seconds of the ultimate skill's active cooldown. With 10 seconds, 2 procs, that's an infinite restore. Another interesting change from the no meta of Death Trap though is to avoid the momentum key passive for the purpose of stacking energy. So, Banished Lords actually works. Since Matthias isn't investing in that concept, there is massive value in the close quarters key passive instead. That's a 300% multiplier that the others are just missing out on, clearly evidenced by the 109 clear. It does require some setup by using a Cutthroat and Marksman skill beforehand to actually benefit from the key passive, but it's minor effort for the results that are worth it. So these and other changes by Matthias have created a very impressive result, so props to him for going against the known meta. Definitely check him out if you want to learn more about it. But overall, I think this is a pretty solid state for Rogue, post PTR nerf, and yet performing super well. There's interesting changes between different versions of the build, and top results for the class compared to others. So yeah, big success I'd say, congrats to Rogues. But finally, this brings us to the Sorcerer with that incredible 111 pit clear. This was achieved by an Eastern player who posted their run on Bilibili, so we can't quite look at it in anything more than 144p quality. So instead, here's this run just a few tiers below that by Zarmos, which is still very impressive and a lot better quality to look at. Either way, the top clears are being achieved by exactly what you'd expect, a lightning spear build. Now in the past, we'd see top pit clears by Sorc being achieved by some awkward bug use. Now, Sorcerer is at the top of the season, and even with a strong showing beyond Necromancer and Rogue to consider compared to that. But the question is how? Well, I talked with Josh about this, our resident Sorcerer player for the channel, and here's what he told me. This time, Sorcerer is leaning into a bug that's carrying its potential yet again. This time, it's all to do with the enlightenment key passive. Now, during enlightenment, all your bonus damage with elements gets added together and applied to all of them. So you'd expect it to go like 4 to 5k% for each of them. Well, peak gear in the best build right now is seeing a ridiculous 50k% bonus element per, resulting in godly power while enlightenment is going. So that seems to be roughly for 10 seconds every 15. So that's more than enough time to function with. Hilariously, it doesn't even seem like people are 100% sure if it's bugged now or if actually it was bugged before and this is it in its fixed state. It's just doing this craziness that was maybe beyond what they intended. It does seem like it's adding together the multis as well as the additives. So how much of it is intentional? One example Josh gave me though is the aspect of elements. That's normally a 35 multiplier to element. During enlightenment, that's essentially doubling. The newer enchant master key passive is 20 times to each element that you have in each enchant slot. And with the familiar now being tagged with all three, fire, cold and shock, it then goes from 60 times to an unbelievable 180 times during that enlightenment. So any build is going to be competitive during enlightenment at the core of the build, but without it, it's actually going to be a big issue. It would be extremely weak compared to that, even on your top lightning spear build. So that's a big problem right now because obviously it's insane. But if they were to just disable the key passive, what would sorcerers be left with? It doesn't seem so easy to deal with compared to say Barb's situation where they disabled one unique. So sorcerer stands at the top for its output and potential and the current highest pick clear. But with some debate possible about whether this is actually intended or an unexpected bug. But yeah, there you have it for now. That's our overview of the current top clears and the builds behind them and what's going on. Once again, remember that these clears do change day by day, and with some of them being really close together, one might overtake another. But it's still an interesting first look, and does give us at least some context as the season begins. For that first balance patch though, it's going to be interesting. Spiritborn definitely needs help, and Sorcerer has that insane scaling, but it's all pretty close at the moment. Compared to say 1 or 2 classes being 20 or 30 pit clears ahead of the rest, this is at least better than that. We'll see what happens though, but for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you, and thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.